Let me level with you completely, without any filters or pretense. The information I'm preparing to reveal isn't something your parents whispered during childhood bedtime stories. This wasn't included in any curriculum your educators forced upon you during those formative academic years. This certainly isn't material the established order desires you to comprehend. Actually, countless individuals will reach their final days remaining entirely oblivious to these realities. That's precisely the outcome those controlling the narrative prefer. Once you absorb what I'm preparing to disclose, there's absolutely no reversing that awareness. This represents knowledge that fundamentally divides your existence into distinct phases. Everything preceding this revelation versus everything following it. 5 centuries past, an individual named Niccolò Machiavelli documented the most hazardous observations regarding human behavior ever compiled. These insights proved so threatening that religious authorities prohibited his writings. These concepts demonstrated such potency that monarchs, government leaders, business executives, and military commanders have examined them privately while publicly denouncing them. What explains this contradiction? Machiavelli refused to theorize. Instead, he authored the instruction guide for understanding humanity. Not our idealized version, not our wishful thinking, but our authentic functioning. Here's the element that ought to alarm you. Individuals already possessing this understanding exploit it against you constantly, in corporate settings, intimate connections, governmental affairs, and conflicts. They're engaged in strategic warfare while you're merely playing simplified games. Consider this carefully. What prevented your parent from teaching you these principles? Why did your instructors omit this? The explanation proves straightforward. Their predecessors never educated them either. Society has conditioned you into believing that perceiving reality accurately makes you pessimistic, that employing strategy renders you deceitful, that comprehending dominance transforms you into something malevolent. Yet here's the unvarnished reality. Remaining uninformed isn't morality, it's vulnerability. Commencing immediately, I intend to equip you with capability. I'm transforming you into someone formidable. Once you perceive these realities, you'll never interpret human exchanges identically again. Therefore, before proceeding further, engage with that approval mechanism, follow this channel, and activate alerts because what I'm preparing to expose will permanently alter your worldview. You absolutely cannot afford missing subsequent content. Throughout your entire existence, you've been informed that humanity operates rationally, that we carefully evaluate alternatives, that we compute consequences, that our choices stem from reasoning and logical analysis. That's fraudulent, representing among the most hazardous deceptions ever fed to you. Machiavelli understood the authentic situation half a millennium ago. He documented, individuals typically assess situations more through visual perception than tactile experience, because everyone possesses sight yet few truly comprehend deeper meaning. Translation: humans make selections based on superficial presentation, on fabricated images, on what appears correct rather than what actually is correct. Here's the disturbing actuality. Most individuals don't desire authenticity. They seek reassurance and psychological comfort. Contemplate this reality. The companion who desperately requests your guidance regarding his deteriorating romantic situation, yet dismisses your counsel because acknowledging truth would inflict pain. The colleague who laments financial struggles, then wastes resources on expensive coffee beverages daily because the habitual behavior provides emotional satisfaction. The female who insists she desires a considerate partner, yet repeatedly gravitates toward the individual who treats her as secondary. Logical thinking perishes immediately upon encountering desire. Rational thought dissolves when confronting anxiety, physical attraction, social positioning, or psychological ease. That's the actual dynamic. You've been approaching this incorrectly because you've been instructed to convince others using information, to prevail in disagreements with proof, to demonstrate the reasonable direction. However, data doesn't influence humans. Emotions accomplish that. The individual who commands emotional responses, who understands bypassing logic to communicate directly with feelings, dominates every environment he occupies. That individual doesn't squander effort attempting to demonstrate correctness. He makes others experience his correctness, which proves infinitely more potent. Examine history's greatest influencers. Dictators didn't ascend to authority using numerical analysis and documentation. They climbed through rhetoric that ignited rage, terror, and aspiration. Massive enterprises don't generate billions by displaying chemical compositions of beverages. They market happiness packaged in containers. Spiritual movements don't expand through philosophical arguments. They proliferate by seizing the emotional core, the spiritual essence, the dread of eternal punishment, and the guarantee of eternal reward. This explains why you lose debates. This clarifies why your recommendations get disregarded. This reveals why individuals you attempt influencing escape your grasp. You assumed humanity operated rationally. They don't. They're dependent individuals pursuing emotional satisfaction. Consequently, here's your initial harsh lesson. Cease attempting to transform thinking with information. Begin molding emotions instead. Desire to compel someone's allegiance? Don't explain what benefits them. Demonstrate what makes them experience positive feelings regarding themselves. Wish to affect a romantic partner? Don't dispute using reasoning. Make them undergo the agony of abandoning you or the pleasure of satisfying you. Want to prevail in commercial settings? Disregard statistics. Construct the narrative that makes your target audience believe you represent the unavoidable victor. The individual who debates with information is merely an instructor. The individual who orchestrates emotions is a sovereign. Once you comprehend this, you'll penetrate everyone surrounding you. The politician's facade, the influencer's manufactured image, the colleague's justifications, all protective coverings designed to shield feelings rather than expose authenticity. However, once you identify the disguise, once you recognize that beneath every action lies an emotion, a vulnerability, a craving, you can manipulate the mechanisms. That's merely the commencement. Because if humanity is irrational, then allegiance itself must be illusory. Only two categories of individuals exist within this reality: hunters and targets. That's everything. Remove the courteous facades, the social constructs, the ethical frameworks, and what remains is nature's most ancient principle: the dominant acquire, the submissive get exploited. Here's the concealed brutality. Vulnerability doesn't merely fail protecting you. It summons predators like crimson fluid in oceanic waters. Why do aggressive individuals select the passive person, never the combative one? Why do organizations eliminate the most vulnerable employees initially? Why do females desert the compliant male and attach themselves to the unyielding one? Because predators invariably select the effortless prey. Machiavelli recognized this. He wrote, "It proves superior being dreaded rather than adored if you cannot achieve both." Not because terror is honorable, but because terror repels the dangers. Affection without power invites treachery, whereas terror without affection ensures survival. Here's the sinister reality most males never comprehend. Vulnerability doesn't exclusively destroy you. It contaminates everyone surrounding you. A vulnerable individual forces others carrying his burden. A vulnerable individual depletes the powerful until they either abandon him or deteriorate alongside him. A vulnerable individual renders the world more severe for everyone else, because when predators consume him, they don't cease. They seek the subsequent victim. That's why vulnerability proves more hazardous than brutality. Brutal individuals at minimum support themselves independently. Vulnerable individuals become gravitational voids, dragging others downward with them. Yet contemporary society instructs you to remain harmless, to diminish yourself, to embrace your vulnerability. They label it emotional awareness. They call it becoming improved. But here's the authentic reality. The individual who cannot protect himself, his household, or his standing is not virtuous. He's a burden. Power isn't discretionary. It's the cost of continuing existence. Once you accept this, the environment appears transformed. Every exchange becomes an evaluation. Who represents the hunter? Who represents the target? Who possesses sufficient strength establishing the regulations? And who demonstrates adequate weakness following them unconsciously? This explains why females pursue males radiating strength, because instinctively, they understand vulnerability cannot safeguard them. This explains why authorities ascend to dominance, because populations prefer obeying the powerful rather than experiencing destruction in the disorder of the vulnerable. And this explains why you must determine, will you be hunter or hunted? Your parent, your educators, perhaps even your mother, they all communicated identical messages. Behave pleasantly, be accommodating, don't create disturbances, don't disturb anyone, and people will appreciate you. They deceived you. Machiavelli observed it centuries previously. He wrote, "Humans are so elementary and so inclined obeying immediate requirements that a deceiver will never lack subjects for his deceptions." Do you comprehend his meaning? People confuse vulnerability for virtue. They confuse compliance for morality, and they confuse being pleasant with being valuable. That's why females claim they desire pleasant males but ultimately choose individuals who violate conventions. That's why companies praise the cooperative employee while promoting the merciless tactician. That's why the environment keeps rewarding those you label rebels, autocrats, predators. Because here's the authenticity. Pleasant is not equivalent to virtuous. Pleasant means avoiding confrontation because you're frightened. Pleasant means articulating what people desire hearing so you'll be accepted. Pleasant means seeking validation, hoping for fragments of recognition. Virtue is something else entirely. Virtue is having the difficult dialogue nobody else will. Virtue is articulating what requires being said even when it makes others uncomfortable. Virtue is standing firm in principle even if it makes you despised. Pleasant individuals chase approval. Virtuous individuals earn respect. And here's the brutal twist. Females don't respect the pleasant individual. Supervisors don't trust the pleasant individual. Companions don't follow the pleasant individual because pleasantness without strength is just disguised vulnerability, and vulnerability is repulsive. Examine history's greatest commanders. Pleasant? Julius Caesar, Alexander, Napoleon. They could be generous, certainly. They could be merciful, certainly, but only when it served their power, never at the expense of strength. Examine modern power, CEOs, presidents, champions. Are they pleasant individuals? Not a chance. They're fair. They protect those who stand with them, but they do not bend for approval. They do not tremble at rejection. They do not fear being disliked, and that's why they're followed. You can be compassionate without being vulnerable. You can be virtuous without being pleasant, but you cannot be respected if you are vulnerable. Strength with compassion is magnetic. Vulnerability with pleasantness is toxic. If you take nothing else from this, take this. Cease attempting to be liked. Start demanding to be respected. Because when the choice is between being feared, being loved, or being ignored, the worst fate for an individual is being ignored. Your parent probably told you allegiance is everything. Be loyal to your companions, be loyal to your organization, be loyal to your female. But Machiavelli, he saw the environment for what it is, not what it pretends to be. And his warning was brutal. Since affection and terror can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer being feared than loved. Read that again. It is safer being feared than being loved. Why? Because affection is fragile. Affection is conditional. Affection is loyal only when it benefits the one giving it. You've seen this play out countless times. But you didn't have the courage to name it. That companion who only contacts when he needs something. That organization that preaches we're a family until the next round of terminations. That female who keeps her alternatives open while demanding your commitment. This isn't allegiance. It's exploitation dressed as allegiance. And here's the part most males never understand. Allegiance without reciprocity isn't noble, it's vulnerability. An individual who keeps giving allegiance to people who don't return it isn't virtuous. He's a fool, and fools are made to be used. Think about the most powerful individuals you know. Not the ones who pretend, but the ones who actually control their lives. Are they blindly loyal? Do they stick around after betrayal, after disrespect, after being taken for granted? Absolutely not. They are strategically loyal. They understand allegiance is a contract, and the moment the contract is broken, all bets are off. Here's the cold truth. Allegiance isn't about being a canine who follows no matter what. It's about being a wolf who walks beside those who prove they're worthy and who bares his teeth the moment they're not. Machiavelli knew this. Machiavelli witnessed monarchs who placed excessive faith in others receiving daggers between their shoulder blades. He observed commanders who believed affection would safeguard them, only to face consumption by identical individuals who pledged devotion. Currently, circumstances remain unchanged. The professional environment, the commercial arena, even your personal residence. Allegiance exists, yet exclusively while serving somebody's agenda. Therefore, how do you apply this understanding? Elementary. Distribute your dedication generously, but demonstrate mercilessness when retracting it. Evaluate individuals. Observe their conduct when there's absolutely nothing benefiting them personally. Recognize who appears during your turbulent periods, not merely your prosperous moments. And never continue providing to those who drain you completely. An individual who demands devotion but never reciprocates is a dictator. However, an individual who continues offering dedication to those who don't reciprocate becomes a servant, and servants experience destruction. Consequently, here's the second harsh lesson. Never squander dedication on those who cannot or refuse to reciprocate it. Because dedication without mutual exchange isn't affection, isn't integrity, isn't honorable, it's vulnerability. And vulnerability faces consumption. However, this generates a frightening inquiry. If dedication is delicate, if affection is circumstantial, then what genuinely safeguards an individual? What protects him from treachery, from manipulation, from being abandoned the instant he's no longer beneficial? Machiavelli's response was disturbing. Not affection, not dedication, but standing. An individual without standing is already finished. He simply doesn't recognize it yet. Machiavelli documented that everyone observes what you seem to be, while few encounter what you genuinely are. Translation: it doesn't concern who you are, it concerns who they believe you are. That's where most individuals falter. They believe genuineness means revealing everything regarding themselves. They excessively share. They expose their anxieties, their vulnerabilities, their uncertainties. They lament being misinterpreted. Then they question why nobody respects them. But here's the authenticity. The environment doesn't compensate the genuine you. The environment compensates the calculated you. Your standing is the protection that guards you from treachery, the weapon that penetrates through deceptions, the presence that arrives before you into every space. With powerful standing, adversaries pause. With feeble standing, even your companions question you. Contemplate history. Alexander conquered half the recognized territory, not exclusively through tactics, but through legend. He circulated narratives that he was unconquerable, a divine being. His adversaries believed it before combat even commenced. Or examine contemporary times. Jobs didn't exclusively construct his corporation. He constructed an atmosphere. People labeled it a reality distortion phenomenon. Investors, workers, even competitors submitted to his authority because his standing made them believe he was invulnerable. Now, contrast that to the individuals you recognize who constantly lament, constantly justify themselves, constantly attempt to persuade others to perceive their authentic core. They're not respected, they're pitied. Here's the harsh lesson. Perception is actuality, and if you don't regulate perception, somebody else will regulate it for you. Want to be perceived as capable? Never complain regarding obstacles, present resolutions. Want to be perceived as valuable? Don't always be accessible. Scarcity generates worth. Want to be perceived as dominant? Never justify your choices to individuals who can't influence your existence. This is calculated genuineness, not being fraudulent, but disclosing exclusively the components of yourself that advance your objectives. Standing is like combustion. Left unmonitored, it extinguishes. Spread too wildly, it consumes you alive. But regulated, it provides illumination, comfort, and intimidation. And here's the cruelest component. Once your standing is contaminated, it requires a lifetime to restore, if it ever returns at all. A single fracture can obliterate years of effort. Therefore, you must protect it more intensely than your finances, more intensely than your connections, because your standing is your authorization into dominance, and without it, you're already banished. But standing alone isn't adequate, because there will always be those who attempt to obliterate it, those who resent it, those who desire your position. And that brings us to Machiavelli's subsequent warning. There is no evading combat. It can exclusively be delayed to the benefit of others. Most individuals believe tranquility is standard and combat is an anomaly. Machiavelli knew the contrary. He wrote that there is no evading combat. It can exclusively be delayed to the benefit of others. Comprehend this. Confrontation is not something that might occur. Confrontation is something that is constantly occurring in quietness, in murmurs, in darkness. The exclusive inquiry is whether you're prepared for it or whether you'll face consumption when it materializes. Think of your existence like a battleground. In your profession, somebody is constantly monitoring your station, anticipating your stumble so they can substitute you. In your connections, there's constantly another individual willing to occupy your position if you become feeble. In your social environment, there's constantly somebody evaluating your limitations, perceiving how extensively they can pressure before you fracture. And here's the brutal actuality. If you're not prepared for combat, you've already been defeated. The accomplished individuals you respect, the ones who ascend above, they aren't astonished by confrontation. They anticipate it, they prepare for it. They arrange during tranquility so they don't hemorrhage during combat. A combatant doesn't sharpen his weapon the instant the adversary materializes. He sharpens it every dawn, even when the territory looks peaceful. Therefore, how does this appear in your environment? In commerce, massive corporations accumulate resources, eliminate competitors before they expand. They prepare extensively before the marketplace transforms. In governance, territories construct weapons, establish partnerships, and penetrate competitors during so-called tranquility. In your personal existence, the individual who maintains physical condition even when he isn't threatened, the individual who constructs his reserves when resources flow, the individual who develops partnerships when he doesn't require them, that individual survives when tempests arrive. Machiavelli provided us the creature analogy. The predator cannot safeguard himself from snares, and the cunning animal cannot protect himself from carnivores. One must therefore be cunning to identify snares, and powerful to intimidate carnivores. Do you perceive it? You must be both, intelligent enough to perceive danger before it materializes, powerful enough to eliminate it when it does. Most individuals select one. They are intelligent but feeble, the cunning animal who eventually faces destruction. Or they are powerful but sightless, the predator who walks directly into destruction because he never anticipated the ambush. The complete individual, the individual who survives and dominates, is the one who integrates both characteristics. He possesses the cunning animal's intelligence to navigate deception and the predator's strength to impose consequences. This is strategic existence, not merely responding to threats but anticipating them, preparing for them, and eliminating them before they even materialize. The environment respects exclusively one category of individual, the one who demonstrates he's prepared for combat even during tranquility, the one who radiates both intelligence and strength simultaneously, the one who makes others comprehend that engaging him carries severe consequences. When you combine these elements, calculated dedication, protected standing, and constant preparation for inevitable confrontation, you become someone others cannot manipulate, cannot betray without consequences, cannot disregard or eliminate. You transform from prey into predator, from servant into sovereign, from somebody others utilize into somebody others respect and intimidate. This is the authentic education Machiavelli provided, not theoretical philosophy, but functional understanding for navigating a hostile environment. The individuals who comprehend these principles don't become malevolent, they become invulnerable. They don't become manipulators, they become impossible to manipulate. They recognize that kindness without strength is exploitation waiting to occur, that affection without boundaries is betrayal waiting to materialize, that tranquility without preparation is defeat waiting to unfold. Therefore, apply these lessons immediately. Guard your dedication like valuable currency. Construct your standing like protective armor, and prepare for confrontation during every peaceful moment. Because the environment doesn't compensate the unprepared, the naive, or the perpetually vulnerable. It compensates those who perceive reality clearly, who act strategically, and who demonstrate they're prepared for whatever materializes. That's the ultimate lesson from Machiavelli. Not cynicism, but clarity. Not manipulation, but mastery. Not malevolence, but invulnerability through understanding. The question isn't whether you'll encounter betrayal, confrontation, or challenges. The question is whether you'll be prepared when they inevitably arrive. The predator who stumbles into snares he failed to anticipate. Yet the individual who masters both characteristics becomes invulnerable. Here's the sinister principle. Don't initiate conflicts, but remain prepared to conclude every single one. Because here's a secret that vulnerable individuals never comprehend. The individual who is obviously prepared for confrontation rarely must engage at all. What's the explanation? Because predators detect strength and they invariably select the more vulnerable target. Therefore, construct yourself into an individual others are frightened to challenge. Not because you're aggressive, not because you're careless, but because you radiate preparedness. Exercise when nobody is observing. Accumulate resources when everyone else squanders. Educate yourself when everyone else is diverted. Transform yourself into a weapon before the confrontation commences. Then when conflict arrives, and it will materialize, you won't experience panic. You'll already be prepared. However, let's be transparent. Even with strength, intelligence, standing, and preparedness, most individuals still face destruction for one elementary reason, because they confuse being pleasant with being powerful. And that's the final deception your parent told you. Individuals prefer imagining that truthfulness governs the environment, that authenticity ascends to the summit, that principles invariably triumph. That's the fantastical narrative. The actuality is that deception has constructed dominions, toppled authorities, and carved history's trajectory more than truthfulness ever accomplished. Machiavelli documented that a sovereign never lacks legitimate justifications to violate his commitments. Examine that statement again. He didn't suggest some individuals deceive. He didn't suggest exclusively the malevolent betray. He stated every commander, every authority, every individual possessing dominance eventually deceives. Because deception is not deterioration, deception is continuation. Examine the organic environment. The cunning creature pretends vulnerability to attract victims. The serpent disguises itself before it attacks. The deep-sea predator conceals itself in obscurity, waving its luminous attraction until the victim approaches its mouth. Humans demonstrate no difference. Politicians market you aspirations they never intend delivering. Corporations wrap toxicity in advertising campaigns of kinship, happiness, and liberation. Even within your personal residence, individuals guarantee dedication, eternal affection, and signify it exclusively until it costs them. Yet most individuals cling to the fantasy that truthfulness will safeguard them, that if they are adequate enough, the environment will compensate them. Imbeciles. Machiavelli recognized the authenticity. The deceiver will never lack victims because individuals are elementary, because individuals are frantic to believe the deception that reassures them. Here's the brutal component. If you decline to deceive, you will still face deception. If you decline to engage the competition, you will still remain a component on somebody else's game board. Does this signify you should fabricate endlessly, betray recklessly, abandon at every opportunity? Absolutely not. That's what imbeciles think dominance represents. But it signifies you must command the craft of regulated deception, displaying facades, concealing weapons, disclosing just adequate to keep others sightless to your genuine intentions. The environment doesn't compensate pure truthfulness. The environment compensates calculated truthfulness. Articulate the authenticity when it strengthens you. Fabricate when it safeguards you. Violate commitments when maintaining them would obliterate you. And above everything, never disregard that everyone else is already executing the identical approach. Here's the principle nobody dares acknowledge. The truthful individual isn't honorable. He's prey. You've been informed your entire existence that principles are absolute, that there's virtue and there's malevolence, that the righteous are compensated and the malevolent are disciplined. But Machiavelli penetrated that fantasy. He comprehended what most individuals never will. Principles are not authenticity. Principles are regulation. Contemplate it. Who determines what's virtuous? Not you, not the populations, but the dominant. When authorities desire compliance, they label it virtue to surrender. When commanders desire sacrifice, they label it integrity to perish for them. When privileged classes desire regulation, they redefine malevolence as anything that threatens their authority. And the populations consume it entirely because believing in principles feels secure. It feels like the cosmos has structure, like fairness invariably triumphs. But history ridicules that fantasy. The religious institution incinerated individuals alive in the designation of principles. Territories justified enslavement, domination, and extermination in the designation of principles. Contemporary administrations demolish metropolitan areas and label it protecting liberation. Principles aren't regarding authenticity, they're regarding narrative. And those who regulate the narrative regulate principles themselves. Here's the more sinister development. The dominant rarely comply with the principles they advocate. They don't have to, they establish it for you. They inform you it's incorrect to fabricate while deceiving you constantly. They inform you it's incorrect to be merciless while eliminating competitors without hesitation. They inform you it's incorrect to be egotistical while accumulating prosperity and resources. What's the explanation? Because a population that believes in fixed principles is elementary to govern. They'll monitor themselves. They'll criticize each other. They'll submit to authority thinking it's righteous. Meanwhile, the dominant violate those regulations whenever they require to, because they recognize principles are just an instrument, not an authenticity. Machiavelli documented that a sovereign must acquire how not to be virtuous and to utilize this understanding, or not utilize it according to requirement. This is the genuine principle. Do not abandon principles entirely. Wield it. Appear principled when it advances you. Violate principles when continuation demands it. And above everything, never become a captive of somebody else's principle system. Because the individual who clings to principles at all expenses is a sacrifice. But the individual who manipulates principles to his authority is a sovereign. Every dominion, Every corporation, every household, every connection survives on the identical concealed economics. Not currency, not affection, not integrity, but terror and compensation. Machiavelli comprehended this principle with brutal transparency. He recognized individuals are not influenced by abstract concepts, but by immediate sensations. The terror of agony and the appetite for satisfaction. Strip away the decorations of principles, spirituality, governance, and you'll discover the identical machinery underneath. Monarchs keep their dominions not by celestial authorization, but because the populations fear their fury more than they despise their governance. Corporations keep workers in formation with the dangling incentive of advancement and the threat of termination. Parents cultivate offspring not through wisdom alone, but through compensations and disciplines woven into daily existence. This is the authentic principle of dominance. He who regulates the equilibrium of terror and compensation regulates the individual. Examine around you the politician who guarantees security from adversaries while offering fiscal advantages, the spiritual leader who guarantees eternal paradise while cautioning of eternal damnation, the romantic partner who withholds fondness as discipline, then saturates it as compensation. These aren't coincidences, they are ancient deliberate tactics. Most individuals fail because they exclusively offer one dimension. They attempt to command with affection, providing compensations endlessly until their offerings lose significance. Or they attempt to command with terror, governing with brutality until rebellion develops. Machiavelli recognized the secret. The craft is in the equilibrium. Excessive compensation cultivates entitlement. Excessive terror cultivates revolt. But an individual who can alternate between both, who can withhold fondness to generate appetite, then deliver it at the summit of craving, that individual generates dedication stronger than restraints. Contemplate the abusive connection where the victim remains. What's the explanation? Because after the brutality comes gentleness. After the tempest comes tranquility. The cycle itself becomes dependent. Contemplate the dictator who survives decades in dominance. What's the explanation? Because he disciplines adequate to inspire terror, but compensates just adequate to prevent hopelessness. And now turn the reflection to yourself. How do you influence others? Through endless providing, hoping they'll adore you, or through cold regulation, forcing them to comply? Both are vulnerable. The genuine Machiavellian combines the two like toxicity and sweetness, crafting dependence so profound that escape feels impossible. This is how you must think. What does this individual fear abandoning most? What does this individual crave most frantically? And how can I position myself as the one who regulates both? Once you respond to that, you possess them. Individuals speak of confidence as if it were mineral, unshakable, permanent, sacred. But Machiavelli recognized better. Confidence is not mineral. Confidence is transparent material. It shines. It's beautiful. It reflects illumination. But the instant it fractures, it disintegrates, and it will never be complete again. Here's the initial sinister principle. Confidence is temporary. It exists exclusively as long as it benefits both dimensions. Contemplate your personal existence. How rapidly did a companion's confidence in you vanish the instant you failed to advance their requirements? How rapidly did your confidence in a commander collapse after a single betrayal? How many connections have perished over one violated commitment, no matter how many virtuous deeds preceded it? This is not the anomaly. This is the regulation. The individual who constructs his existence on confidence is constructing on transparent material, and eventually it will fracture beneath his feet. But here's where the powerful separate from the vulnerable. The vulnerable beg for confidence. They make declarations. They plead. They demand belief in their genuine intentions. And when that confidence disintegrates, they collapse with it. The powerful never beg for confidence. They engineer it. They manufacture it through repetition, appearance, and regulated exposure. They utilize it as an instrument, never as a foundation. Contemplate the fraudulent artist. He survives not because he is genuinely trustworthy, but because he recognizes how to appear trustworthy. Contemplate the politician. He doesn't require genuine confidence. He requires just adequate to obtain the support. Contemplate the romantic manipulator. He doesn't require unconditional confidence. He requires just adequate to lower protections. That's the second sinister principle. Confidence doesn't require being genuine. It exclusively requires being convincing. Here's the initial sinister principle. Confidence is temporary. It exists exclusively as long as it benefits both dimensions. Contemplate your personal existence. How rapidly did a companion's confidence in you vanish the instant you failed to advance their requirements? How rapidly did your confidence in a commander collapse after a single betrayal? How many connections have perished over one violated commitment, no matter how many virtuous deeds preceded it? This is not the anomaly, this is the regulation. The individual who constructs his existence on confidence is constructing on transparent material, and eventually it will fracture beneath his feet. But here's where the powerful separate from the vulnerable. The vulnerable beg for confidence. They make declarations. They plead. They demand belief in their genuine intentions. And when that confidence disintegrates, they collapse with it. The powerful never beg for confidence, they engineer it. They manufacture it through repetition, appearance, and regulated exposure. They utilize it as an instrument, never as a foundation. Contemplate the fraudulent artist. He survives not because he is genuinely trustworthy, but because he recognizes how to appear trustworthy. Contemplate the politician. He doesn't require genuine confidence. He requires just adequate to obtain the support. Contemplate the romantic manipulator. He doesn't require unconditional confidence. He requires just adequate to lower protections. That's the second sinister principle. Confidence doesn't require being genuine. It exclusively requires being convincing. And the third principle is even more sinister. The individual who confides excessively is simpler to regulate than the individual who confides nothing at all. Because the individual who confides blindly will hand you the mechanisms to his personal obliteration. He will pardon betrayal after betrayal, convinced you'll transform. He will believe justifications no matter how hollow. He will cling to the fantasy of confidence long after it has perished, because the alternative terrifies him. This is why vulnerable individuals are consumed. They think confidence is proof of affection, proof of integrity, proof of principles. But in authenticity, confidence is just leverage, and those who comprehend this hold the restraint around every blind believer's neck. Therefore, incinerate this into your consciousness. Never depend on confidence. Utilize it, mold it, manipulate it, but never rest your continuation on it. Because confidence is not mineral, it is transparent material, and it was manufactured to fracture. You've now perceived what most individuals will never perceive, that humans are not rational, they are emotional. That dedication without reciprocity is vulnerability. That standing is protection sharper than metal. That conflict is not approaching, it is constantly here. That pleasantness is vulnerability disguised as virtue. That terror outlasts affection. That deception is continuation. That facades are necessary. That principles are a cage. That betrayal is unavoidable. That terror and compensation are the authentic currencies of regulation. And that confidence, the thing most individuals cling to, is nothing but transparent material anticipating disintegration. You were instructed not to recognize this. You were prepared to close your vision, comply, engage pleasantly, be harmless. But now the obstruction is removed. Now you perceive the environment not as it pretends to be, but as it genuinely is. And here's the most hazardous component. You can't reverse course. You can't unrecognize this. From this instant forward, you'll perceive every smile as a facade, every commitment as attraction, every act of virtue as a tactic. You've stepped into the obscurity, and once you've perceived it, the illumination will never obstruct you again. Therefore, the inquiry is no longer, will you acquire these authentications? You already have. The inquiry is, will you utilize them? Because understanding like this is a weapon. In the hands of the vulnerable, it deteriorates into suspicion and terror. But in the hands of the powerful, it becomes dominance. The category of dominance that manipulates the environment. If you're powerful enough to transport it, then advance forward with it. If you're excessively vulnerable, then conceal it and pretend you never heard me articulate. But for those who are prepared to take the subsequent progression into this void, this is exclusively the commencement. Machiavelli left us more than cautions. He left us diagrams for influence, for supremacy, for continuation, and I'll demonstrate you every single one. Therefore, if you desire more, if you desire to advance deeper into the tactics that authorities, manipulators, commanders, and monarchs have utilized for centuries, then listen carefully. Engage with this material, follow now, because the subsequent lesson will not make you comfortable. It will make you invulnerable. And when that occurs, you will never be disregarded again.